Enceladus. Chapter 1. Deposition. Since the objects settled in the central region of São Paulo, the estimated number of deaths was around 90,000. Within a 10-kilometer radius, there was a complete exclusion zone. Any human, animal, or plant would perish immediately. The delay in defining the cause and boundaries of the perfect circle was one of the factors that led more people to enter the zone. These could be passersby, rescue teams, or individuals looking for their relatives and friends. Tormund. Since death occurred instantly, a wall of bodies and vehicles began to form at the edges of the object's interference area. This boundary became visible in aerial captures. The images had to be collected at specific angles because flying over the area also caused an immediate shutdown of any electronic or mechanical device. There was electromagnetic interference around the artifact that prevented a detailed view of the surface. However, the approximate image revealed a reddish-colored sphere, approximately 4 meters in diameter. It never touched the ground. Security camera footage showed the moment of approach. It didn't seem to be falling, but rather landing softly, like a helicopter. However, without wind oscillations, it behaved as if air resistance were a negligible variable. The resemblance was undeniable. It was a smaller version of the 6 spheres that had established orbit around the Moon 3 years earlier. Evidence that was initially circulated as false internet information, the images from amateur telescopes were now internally recognized as legitimate by the government itself. In fact, an important question to raise would be why the government didn't alert the population. NASA sent 2 missions with probes to study the spheres. Both failed. They lost contact as they approached the objects. The devices simply stopped working, and the spacecraft crashed into the Moon's surface. At that moment, most nations were already working together to unravel the origin of the phenomenon. After the Americans, the Chinese also sent probes, this time with electromagnetic wave deflectors on the side facing the Moon. The result was the same. Now the question remained, what would be the measure to isolate the area and perhaps study a way to prevent the exclusion zone from growing? A team composed of military and scientists was dispatched to Brazil. This group was tasked with investigating the electromagnetic energy emanating from the sphere. They were Lieutenant Colonel Ethan Miller of the U.S. Army, French physicist Dr. Loan Poulin, and Chinese biologist Jin Wu. They joined a group of Brazilian Army personnel led by Colonel Tiberio Azevedo. Chapter 2, Destination Delhi. In the improvised command center in the area, Colonel Azevedo informed Miller of the crowd containment procedures that had been adopted since the crisis began. Miller suggested complete control of the information disseminated by local and international media. The idea of an attack from the Moon was not yet widely known, although there had been speculation in the alternative media. Everyone wore protective clothing for ionizing radiation as a precaution. Poulin, along with an army team, measured the exclusion zone to try to identify an expansion of the field. Initial readings detected a 10 centimeters fluctuation between contraction and dilation of the sphere, indicating a possible stabilization of the phenomenon. On the other side of the boundary, Wu tried to drag an animal specimen out of the zone with a mechanical lever. The field interference made it difficult to manipulate anything inside the area. Nevertheless, it was possible to hook the clothing of a man with the lever's hook. It was attached to a vehicle that managed to pull the body out. They placed the man on a stretcher and took him to a nearby tent where Wu and the medical team could examine him. The autopsy revealed a total absence of injuries, except for minor abrasions caused by the fall from fainting. Internal organs were intact. There were no signs of chemical or radioactive poisoning. No pathogenic biological agents or signs of infection were found. In fact, that man was in perfect condition, except, of course, for the absence of vital signs. It was as if someone had irreversibly turned him off. Wu went to call Colonels Miller and Azevedo so they could observe the discovery. As he left his tent, he noticed a frenzied movement among the military group. Without understanding what could be happening, He ran toward his colleagues. He found Miller talking on the radio while Azevedo and Poulain were in conversation. He asked the two what was going on. It was the moon. Another one of the spheres had detached and was heading for Earth. Satellites calculated the speed and trajectory of the second object. The sphere would enter Earth's atmosphere in 8 hours, and the likely destination was New Delhi, the capital of India. Chapter 3: The Stranger. Stunned by the news, Miller contacted Washington to find out what the procedure would be. Would a new team be sent to India, or would the three of them be taken to the landing site? A bomb threat alarm was broadcast in New Delhi, and a complete evacuation of the city center began almost immediately. The city was densely populated, and access roads became congested within minutes. Civil helicopters were quickly summoned to assist in the rescue of people. A bomb squad team was prevented from heading to the scene. The military took control of all operations, and police and firefighters were only supposed to assist in the evacuation. Miller was informed that he should stay in Brazil and await further orders. The information was that the 6 spheres were still orbiting the moon. Therefore, just as with the artifact that landed in São Paulo, the objects had not decreased in number. Satellite images captured the moment of launch. They behaved like bacteria in fission. One of the spheres split into 2 and was launched toward Earth. This fact raised great concern among the group. The way the spheres were conceived, the number of urban areas susceptible to attack was indeterminate. While discussing the possibilities, they noticed the approach of a man. The stranger wore a black suit, sunglasses, and a hat. He asked the 4, "What is the position of the second sphere?" Azevedo retorted, "Who are you? Who gave you permission to invade the perimeter?" Looking around to complain to one of his subordinates, Azevedo realized that everyone was motionless and staring at the ground. The man then replied, "There's nothing to be done about this or the next city. You need to stop the lunar device." Chapter 4: Marco's Writings. Before trying to understand the origin of the stranger, his apparent powers, and why he offers help in this moment of crisis, it is necessary to establish some facts that led to the appearance of the spheres. After the events of 3034, Marco was completely disturbed by the conclusion of his contact with the future. Being aware of the events, and at the same time of the helplessness and inevitability, was something that haunted him for years. This Cassandra syndrome tormented him like a curse. He used all kinds of drugs to try to get rid of such thoughts and escape from reality. He was eventually admitted to a psychiatric hospital by his own family. Finally, he decided that the only thing that could end such nightmares was to find a way for the contact to be wrong. He began writing down the entire record of the connection in a notebook. Rereading his own writings, he looked for a flaw that could allow for intervention. Chapter 5: About the ship that crashed in 32,096 BC. Since the first mapping of temporal rifts, it was possible to observe some paths that did not seem destined to anywhere. The rifts could be fully read in terms of their connection, date, time, duration, and locations of the interval. These others seemed to be caused by natural events, perhaps moments when a specific point in space was hit by a high concentration of cosmic radiation during a short period. Travelers were advised to avoid such paths because the final destination would be uncertain, although transit between ships was practically non-existent since a group would only be allowed to launch after the return of the last vehicle. A computer calculated possible intersections in time to avoid paradoxical interference between experiments. For example, if an individual were captured, and this event prevented the man from meeting his future wife, who would generate his future child, who by some coincidence, this child became the target of another collection in another period of time, the existence of the two ships would be compromised. The decision was to allow time to settle with the modifications before the next trip. In a routine mission to collect genetic material, with a team of 3 crew members from Svalbard, something went awry. For an unexplained reason, the computer detected an unplanned access to the temporal rift. The ship would be pushed out of the path. The space between temporal rifts could not be occupied by any matter. It was a limbo where experimental objects from the early journeys were frozen for eternity. The only solution for the crew was to enter one of the natural rifts. This type of connection was very unstable, and the vehicle suffered several damages in the process. But it finally stabilized in an unidentified time. They realized that the ship was hovering about 30 meters above a frozen surface. Judging by the landscape, they assumed they hadn't left their original time period. That was when the navigator finally indicated their current position, 75 degree, 31.80. August 26, 32,096 BC.